The House will come to order. The Pledge of Allegiance this morning will be led by Jakari Lawson and Jada Lawson from Denver.
Please join us in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Mr. Kohler, please take the roll.
Representatives Becker, Buck, Buckner, Conti, Representative Conti.
Absent.
Absent. Quorum. Court. Del Grosso. Dorr. Duran. Everett. Exum. Fields. Fisher. Representative Fisher.
Absent.
Foote. Garcia. Gardner. Giroux. Janal. Representative Conti is present. Hamner. Holbert. Hollinghorse. From where?
Absent.
Humphrey. Joshi. Kagan. Representative Fisher is present. Representative Kagan. Absent? Kagan absent. Kraftharp. Labuda. Landgraf. Lawrence. Lebsock. Lee. May. McCann. McLaughlin. McNulty excused. Melton. Mitch Bush. Moreno. Murray. Kagan present. Murray excused. Navarro. Nordberg. Pabon. Peniston. Pedersen. Primavera.
Sonnenberg. I'm make absent.
Priola. Rankin. Rosenthal. Ryden. Sane. Salazar. Schaefer. Scott. Singer. Sonnenberg. Stevens. Stevens excused. Swam. Representative Swam. Representative Murray is present. Swam absent. Szabo. Tyler. Vigil. Waller. Williams. Wilson. Wright. Young. Speaker Farinino.
Are you done?
No, we gotta wait. We gotta call the roll.
Oh, I didn't know where you were.
We don't know where Swam is at 61. He was just coming in.
Oh, it's okay. I got you.
You see him?
Oh, there he is.
There he is. 62 and 3.
Yes.
With 62 members present, 3 excused, a quorum is present. Representative Becker.
Mr. Speaker, I move that the reading of the Journal of April 15th be dispensed with and that it be approved as corrected by the Chief Clerk.
You've heard the motion. All those in favor say aye. All those opposed, no. The ayes have it. The motion is adopted. Announcements and introductions. I know we have some. Representative Williams.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And members, today you'll see we have a lot of visitors. Today is the second annual African American Youth Day, that is being sponsored by the Black Democratic Legislative Caucus. We are proud to have over 150 youth here today. The schools that are being represented is the Young Aspiring Americans for Social and Political Action, Overland High School, Prairie Middle School, East High School, Denver School of Science and Technology, Aurora Lights P20 Pathway, North Middle School Health and Science Technology, Gateway High School, Lookout Mountain Youth Services, Hinckley High School, Julia Greeley Academy, Overland High School and Prairie Middle School, Adams City High School, Kearney Middle School, Adams City Middle School, Thunder Ridge Middle School, and we have parents here also. The children will be here till noon, and please feel free to stop by the old Supreme Court chambers between 10:30 and noon to greet our visitors. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Representative Williams. Representative Peniston.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and colleagues. Today is COYAC Day, Colorado Youth Advisory Council, and we have about half of them here with us here in the chamber, and I would like to introduce them. COYAC kids, would you all stand up, please? COYAC students, please stand up. Welcome. Colleagues, you might stop by and find out if these particular ones represent your area, and please do, if you possibly can, come to the lunch in room 356. You will be absolutely amazed at the kind of policy decision-making thoughtfulness that these kids have gone through and the kinds of recommendations they have for us. You will be amazed. Both sides of the aisle will be amazed. So please do come and hear what they have to say. We put them into effect as a legislature, and we need to support what they do, and we definitely need to listen. So please do come.
Further announcements and introductions. Seeing none, we'll proceed to our next order of business. Third reading of bills, final passage. Members, please return to your desks. Court rule is not relaxed. Mr. Kohler, please read the title of House Bill 1037.
House Bill 1037, Representative Landgraf, Senator Baumgartner, concerning enforcement of laws against designer drugs in connection with making and reducing appropriations.
Madam Majority Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Speaker, I move for the adoption of House Bill 1037 on third reading and final passage.
Seeing no discussion, the question for the House is the passage of House Bill 1037 on third reading and final passage. Mr. Kohler, please open the machine, and members proceed to vote.
She's going to have the voice vote. All right. Yeah, maybe it just takes a few. Yeah, we'll see. No one voting?
Representatives Duran, Janal, McCann, Ryden, Priola, and Stevens. Close the machine with 63 aye votes, 0 no votes, 2 excused, and 0 absent. House Bill 1037 is passed. Co-sponsors. Dan, who's doing the journal? Who's doing seconds? We're going in it now. What? We're going in seconds now. Close the machine. We'll proceed to our, remember it's a little loud in here. If we could keep the side conversations down. Thank you. And I know we're out of introductions, but we do have a former member in the chamber with us. So let's us welcome former Representative Beasley here with us. We'll proceed to our next order of business, general order, second reading of bills. Mr. Assistant Majority Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I move the House now resolve the committee of the whole for consideration of general orders.
You've heard the motion. Seeing no objection, the House will resolve itself in the committee of the whole for consideration of general orders. Representative Pabon will take the chair.
Is the mic on? Okay. With your unanimous consent, the bills will be read by title unless there is a request for reading a bill at length. Committee amendments will not be read unless requested, as they are printed and in your bill folders. Floor amendments will be shown on the screen and on your iPads and not read unless requested. Bills will be laid over upon motion of the Majority Leader. The coat rule is relaxed. Mr. Kohler, please read the title of House Bill 1015.
House Bill 1015 by Representative Kraft-Tharp, also Senator Kerr, concerning extension of the Transitional Jobs Program.
Representative Kraft-Tharp.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, members. Members, I know this is a busy day. I'm pleased and proud to move House Bill 1015, the Business, Labor, Economic Workforce Development Committee report and the Appropriations report.
To the Appropriations report, Representative Kraft-Tharp.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So the Appropriations Committee basically helped this bill out in two ways. One is we were able to provide an amendment so that to roll over $800,000 that is not being used in the program this year to help continue the program next year. The second is that, as we'll talk about in the amendment in the Business Committee, that this program will be extended until July 2017, and that through the amendment with the Appropriations report, this is a wind-down period, and it will not cause additional appropriations. I ask for your support for the Appropriations Committee report.
Is there any further discussion on the Appropriations Committee report? Seeing none, the question before us is the passage of the Appropriations Committee report. All those in favor say aye. All those opposed say no. The Appropriations Committee report passes. To the Business, Labor, Economic, and Workforce Development report.
Thank you, thank you, members, for your support. So the Business Committee, as I mentioned, extended this program from December 2016 until July 2017, and basically that was to align this program with the department's fiscal year. So I ask your support of the Business Committee report.
Is there any? Representative Holbert. Members, can we please have your attention this morning?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Representative Kraft-Tharp, I just wonder if you could comment on extending this program. I do understand aligning it with the end of the fiscal year, but do you see this program sunsetting and going away as of June 2017, or might we see in some effort to continue this program indefinitely.
Representative Kraftharp.
Thank you, Representative Holbert, for your question. So, Representative Holbert, as soon as we get to the bill itself, I could talk about the success of this program in helping people become. Hang on just one second before you jump in there. Let me finish my sentence, okay? So we could talk about the success of this program in helping people become employed, especially during the bad times of this recession and this time of high unemployment. It is my hope, as I think that is also your hope, that the economy is really in a robust place, that we are not seeing those people who are chronically unemployed. Representative Holbert, let me remind you that we are talking about the military veterans. We are talking about the older folks over the age of 50. We are talking about those people under the income level of 150% of federal poverty level, and that this program is helping them. And I'm hoping that by 2017, we will not need to have these kind of programs. And I think you and I are in agreement with that.
Representative Holbert.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yes, we are talking about veterans and others who need assistance in finding employment. We're also talking about families that are struggling to make ends meet and actually pay taxes in the state of Colorado. And we're talking about a program that is going to take, looks like $1.2 million out of the pockets of taxpayers. And I think it's a reasonable debate on the committee report that deals with extending this program. This is the issue in the Business Committee report. So I understand your interest, your preference to wait until we're on the bill, and I suppose I can do that. But my question will remain the same. If we're going to extend this another 6 months and go out to June of 2017, is that when we could look at this program sunsetting, or are there other economic factors, some level of unemployment, that we might agree that would trigger stepping back from these programs and asking taxpayers to fund this program?
Representative Kraftharp.
Thank you so much, Representative Holbert. I don't mind talking about this at all right now because I'm proud of this successful program. As you know, because you heard about this in the Business Committee, that this program was a pilot program in 2009, that over 75% of the people that were served in this program during that pilot program went on to unsubsidized jobs. That this program helped them to be able to get the job skills that they need to be able to go on. This is a successful program. I can't predict what's going to happen between now and 2017. And just to remind you that the additional 6 months is at no additional cost. It's a wind down period, so it's not. So that is what the amendment is on this committee report.
Is there any further discussion on the committee report? Seeing none, the question before us is the passage of the Business, Labor, Economic, and Workforce Development report. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed say no. The committee report passes. To the bill, Representative Kraftharp.
Thank you. Thank you, members, for letting me bring this bill to you. So I am always pleased to bring to you a successful program, and that's what we have here. This is a program that we have piloted. This is a program that
Excuse me for one moment, Representative Kraftharp.
It's all right.
Members, I know that we have wonderful guests in the chamber, and I know many of you are helping them to understand the process, but it is becoming extremely loud in here, and we do have House Bill 1015 that we are debating, and maybe one of the lessons that you can teach is to listen and follow along. So very much, and I'm talking to the children on that, please suggest to your members that they pay attention and follow along. Representative Kraftharp.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I really appreciate that. So, members, again, I'm pleased to bring to you a program that has been proven successful. In 2009, this program, funded through the federal stimulus dollars, provided job coaching, job training, and subsidized jobs for workers. Over 75% of the people served moved on to unsubsidized work to permanent work situations. This program was brought back to you last year, in which you passed it for 18 months to provide services for 546 Coloradans. As of today, in this program that we brought back last year, 560 individuals were assessed, approved, and enrolled. Of these, 174 were placed in subsidized employment, and 59 of those in this short period of time have now transitioned into unsubsidized jobs. Members, let me emphasize to you, this program is aimed to provide help for those who truly need help in gaining job skills. This program is aimed and does help our military veterans, folks under the federal poverty level of 150%, older folks over the age of 50. This helps provide the tools of the toolkit for those people that truly need help and is successful. Thank you.
Representative Holbert.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Well, members, this is an effective program. I will admit that much. But it is also another example of where the federal government has come in and provided funding for a short period of time in order to create the expansion of government, get into this program, and then leaves it to the state of Colorado, the taxpayers of Colorado, to continue to fund this program. And I think our question needs to be, at what point will the state no longer fund this program? My concern with this and others is that now they just exist in perpetuity, that they never really go away, because when would we have the leadership, the will to say no more, that we've solved this problem, let us move on? We have extended this program now through June of 2017. I think that if we look carefully, that would be beyond the terms of those even serving here now, and then even those serving in the next election. We've extended this out and punted that decision on to our successors, and I think that's wrong. At some point, we need to come up with some trigger and agree that at some point, unemployment will reach a level where we can say this has been successful and we can move on, and the taxpayers of Colorado no longer have to keep taking money out of their pocket for paying something that some might justify as just being the right thing to do, no matter what level of unemployment there is. This program was introduced under extraordinary circumstances, call it the Great Recession, and I understand that. But if we're going to move out of that Great Recession and claim recovery and success, at what point can we do that with this program? And I think that's the underlying question. I oppose House Bill 1015 because, again, it has extended that decision beyond our authority, beyond the time period that this Assembly, this House will sit. Now it's even beyond the time period that the next General Assembly will sit, and I think that's the wrong thing to do. We need to be accountable to the taxpayers of Colorado, and we need to have accountability for this and other programs. I ask for a no vote.
Representative Giroux.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Members, one of the best lessons I ever learned was when you've got the votes, don't talk, less is more, just present your bill and sit down. I'm going to be a yes on this bill because it is helping veterans. I agree with a lot of what Representative Holbert is saying, but I also know there's a lot of veterans out there that are still trying to place themselves after serving their country. So I'll be a yes vote.
Representative Schaefer.
So I can finish up this one.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Members, we still have a lot of Coloradans who are unemployed, and we all ran for being in this building so that we would create jobs and a better economy. So let's do this opportunity right now. Let's pass this bill and lower our unemployment rate, even lower than where it is. So let's get the jobs created that we promised the people of Colorado, and I ask for and I vote.
Bill, and I was like, okay, we need someone for Janelle's bill.
Representative Joshi.
And so I was like, hey, Mike, we need someone for Janelle's bill.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And members, if this bill is good and if we are doing what we are talking about doing,
Thank you.
something doesn't make sense to me when I look at the fiscal note. In 2014 and 15, the personal services and travel program evaluation and outreach costs, which are 21,000 and 52,000, suddenly double in 2015-16 and 2016-17. I think what we should do is try to keep the cost down and give the money where it should be going, which is to provide the training, provide the jobs, and all that. So, Representative Krafthar, can you explain to me why the cost is going and why we are not spending that money to help the people who really need the help?
Representative Krafthar.
Thank you, Representative Joshi. Actually, the money is going to help those people who are needing help. And if you look at your fiscal note, you'll see that the first part is a half a year, and then you've got 2 full years, which is why you see the amount double. Members, this is a good bill. Let's help those folks that need help be able to get jobs. I ask for an aye vote. Thank you.
Representative Gardner.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Well, members, I too share some of Representative Holbert's concerns, but the fact is that this program is working. It's working in El Paso County. It's working in El Paso County for veterans. It's working for older workers, non-custodial parents.
Excuse me for 1 second, Representative Gardner. Members, please respect the discussion going on in the well this morning. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. As I was saying, members, I share some of Representative Holbert's concerns about this bill. However, as I looked at it, as I spoke with those who administer the program, it has done a lot of good in El Paso County for veterans, for older workers, for non-custodial parents who are struggling so that they can pay child support. That is the focus of this bill. And for that reason, I voted for it in appropriations and will vote for it here on the floor and ask you to consider it closely yourself on its merits. And I would ask for an aye vote. Thank you.
Representative Krafthar.
Thank you. I'm only coming up here one more time because Representative Gardner reminded me of something really important, members. This bill is providing services statewide, Teller County, Pueblo County, Larimer County, Denver County, all around our state. This is helping. Thank you, Representative Gardner, for reminding me of that. Members, this is a great rural, urban, suburban bill to help folks here in Colorado. Please vote yes. Thank you.
Is there any further discussion on House Bill 1015? Seeing none, the question before us is the passage of House Bill 1015. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed say no. No. House Bill 1015 is adopted. Madam Majority Leader, the committee will take a brief recess. committee will come back to order.
The committee will come back to order.
Oh.
Ma-
2 minutes to get the rest of them out.
Sure.
Brief recess.
Committee will take a brief recess. The House will come back to order. The committee will come back to order. Thank you. Madam Majority Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I move to lay over House Bill 1297 and Senate Bill 158 until after House Bill 1102.
Bills will be laid over as requested by the majority.
The bills will be laid over as requested by the Majority Leader.
Hit the gavel. Mr. Kohler, please read the title of House Bill 1102.
Yeah. Mr. Kohler, please read the title of House Bill 1102.
House Bill 1102 by Representative Peniston, also Senator Kirk, concerning gifted education programs in public schools.
Representative Peniston.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good morning, colleagues. I move House Bill 1102 and the Education Report and the Appropriations Committee Report.
To the Appropriations Committee report.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. In the Appropriations Committee, because we narrowed this down to a half-time position for a gifted talented coordinator, we were able to reduce the fiscal note by really over half, and that's what the Appropriations Report did. I ask for your aye vote on the Appropriations Committee report.
Is there any further discussion on the Appropriation Committee report? Seeing none, the question before us is the adoption of the Appropriations Committee report. All those in favor say aye. Aye. All those opposed? The committee report is adopted. And now to the Education Committee report, Representative Peniston.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. In the Education Committee, actually Representative Wilson was the eagle eye that recognized this little possible glitch. And so we were able to put in that if, oh, I'm sorry, Representative Wilson, that was a different bill in education. My apologies. Anyway, we realized that we needed to specify very clearly that if an administrative unit already had a gifted talented coordinator, that they would still get the money still for the half-time person, and they could use that money for any part of their gifted programs. So I ask for your yes vote on the Education Committee report.
Is there any further discussion on the Education Committee report? Seeing none, all those in favor say aye. Aye. All those opposed? Committee report is adopted. Representative Peniston.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I can't tell you, colleagues, how excited I am to bring this bill to you. We have put some mandates, some requirements for districts to identify first and serve our gifted students in the state of Colorado. And what this bill does is it gives them the resources to do it. Now, I know with a 21-page bill, it seems like we're doing more than that, but our really good drafting staff has assured me that so much of this 21 pages is stuff that's already in the law for gifted students, but it had to be moved from a different place. And some of it's clarifying language from when we separated the gifted, talented student language from the special ed language in the Exceptional Children's Bill. And so some of that's a clarification of that. So there's actually very little new in this bill, and it's a wonderful thing to be able to give our districts resources for what we've already required. So with that, I ask for your yes vote.
Representative Viola.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Representative Peniston, thanks for bringing this bill here. We did hear it in the Education Committee, but there is one question that comes to mind concerning the new revised fiscal note that I don't remember coming up in committee, and that is, what exactly is the $6 million used for? Because I heard you just say that there's not a lot new in the bill, but this will provide resources. Could you specifically describe what those resources are? Are they curriculum that is tougher than current curriculum?
Representative Peniston.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Well, Representative Priola, the appropriations helped us cut down the appropriation to $3.4 million. So that's, first of all, it's not $6 million anymore. It's 3.4. And what that pays for is because we have asked school districts to identify gifted students. So we are giving them the money to use for the screenings of kids between kindergarten and second grade, and so the money pays for the actual screenings. We don't want to put an unfunded mandate on our school districts or our administrative units. So it pays for that, and then predominantly it pays for a half-time coordinator. That's the two things this bill really does, is provide universal screening so we don't let any kids drop through the cracks. We know that we're losing some low income and some minority kids in particular, but other kids as well, who are not identified by a particular teacher, because right now teachers are the gatekeepers and they do not have the qualifications to really determine a gifted student. So not only are we giving districts the money for this screening, we are giving districts the money to hire this half-time. I wish it could be a full-time person. Districts need it to be. We are giving them the money to hire a half-time endorsed, gifted, talented, endorsed person to run the program that we have asked districts and administrative units already to do. We asked them to serve gifted students, and that's what this person will be able to do. So that's a big part of the money.
Representative Schaefer.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Members, many people do not understand that gifted and talented children are at-risk children. We have a stereotype about them that they can make it on their own. They don't need any special help. And if you look at the line of achievement for most children, it goes up over the years. But when I last look at the line of achievement for gifted kids, it's flat. In fact, a lot of them drop as they progress into school. So I think when you realize that the gifted kids are our future leaders, our future artists, our future writers, our future scientists and engineers, this is an overdue bill, members. This is time to pass this bill. And I want to thank Representative Peniston for working all these years for this very at-risk group. Thank you.
Representative Holbert, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Representative Peniston, I would like to understand the progress of the fiscal impact of the state. Originally, this bill had a fiscal note, state expenditures of just under $900,000, $894,000. Then apparently as the Education Committee amended the bill, the fiscal note jumped from just under $900,000 to 5.9 million, so it jumped up $5 million. And as you correctly pointed out, with the Appropriations Committee report, it went from $900,000 to $5.9 million, and now down to $3.4 million. Can you explain what the taxpayers of Colorado were getting at $900,000 compared to $5.9 million compared to the current $3.4 million? Is it a matter of how many kids would benefit from this bill and gifted and talented, or how many people would be hired? How much money we dump into the building across the street? What's the difference?
Representative Peniston.
Thank you, Representative Holbert. That does appear to be a little crazy on the funding. The first $900 million, when that fiscal note came to me after this bill was introduced, I looked at our fiscal analyst and I said, you know what, we are estimating this to be about $5 million. I'm not sure where the $900,000 came from. And he looked at me and he said, Representative Peniston, this is one of the first times I've ever had a legislator come to me and say the fiscal note is not high enough. So I'm not exactly sure what he took into account there, but it was clearly not this bill. And he went immediately back and said, oh, yeah, you're right, this doesn't look like what it should, and put it at a $5.9 million expenditure. And what we were getting for that was basically the same thing, except we have cut it down from a full-time position. That's what the $5.9 million would have paid for, a full-time gifted coordinator in each administrative unit, and that comes with some expense. But in order to be respectful of our budget process and the taxpayers' money, and just trying to get through appropriations, we agreed to lower it to a half-time position, and that's what lowered the fiscal note as drastically as you see. You go from a full-time position everywhere to a half-time. Now, I did want to say that about half.
Members, please keep it down. Thank you.
About half of the districts or the administrative units, and that can be the Institute of Charter Schools as well, they already have full-time endorsed gifted talent coordinators. But this is not picking winners and losers. Every administrative unit will get this money. And what it means, if you already are employing someone in that capacity that is certified and meets the requirements, then the district, the administrative unit, will get the same amount of money and can put that money into their program, their gifted program. And for sure, these programs are not nearly funded enough. We know that. We can't send a kid who is a talented pianist to Juilliard School of Music and have districts pay for that. We can't even expect a district to get a Steinway piano for that kid. But we can expect that district to recognize that giftedness and to do what they can. It says throughout law, the gifted education law, which is exceptional child law, part 2, it's always within the appropriate funding. And we know districts have struggled with that. And so if they already have committed to their gifted program with a coordinator, this gives them that extra money to use in that program. So every gifted kid in the state of Colorado does succeed, does come out ahead with this bill.
Representative Everett.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. You know, Representative Peniston, I do appreciate your commitment to the gifted and talented children. I know you've been a champion of these issues since you've been down here, and thank you for that. I do have a problem with the bill. I mean, we heard all throughout the session, all throughout testimony on this bill and many other bills about no more mandates from the state and sort of cut the strings and just give us some money. I think that this bill is very heavy on the mandates, and it's going to really affect rural school districts, so I would urge a no vote.
Representative Peniston.
Thank you. Well, Representative Everett, I appreciate that concern. Let me read what is already in state statute. First of all, in the legislative declaration, it says the General Assembly further finds and declares, this is on 22-20-201, colleagues, for those of you that just can't wait to open up your law books and get busy with that. The General Assembly further finds and declares that traditional assessment methods currently used do not adequately identify some gifted children, including those who are economically disadvantaged, those who are from ethnic or cultural minorities, and those with disabilities. And then it says, in 222204, each administrative unit shall. This is state law, colleagues. I'm reading out of our law books. Already, each administrative unit shall adopt and implement a program plan to identify and serve gifted children. It is law, and we have never funded that. So this is not more unfunded mandates. This is mandates that already exist, and we are giving the districts and the administrative units the resources to do what we've already told them they had to do but never paid for. So this is a boon for districts.
Representative Murray.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I too appreciate Representative Peniston's desires to help this group, and in fact, I used to teach gifted education during my brief stint as a teacher, so I understand the importance of this particular group of children to the future of our society and how there needs to be a special way to manage them within the school district. But I would point out, as we're talking about administrative units across the state, our educational institutions, our K-12 educational institutions, they came in and they testified against this bill. Their hearts are definitely with gifted students, as it is with all of the students in their administrative unit. But Case and Casby are they're both opposed. Both groups are opposed to this bill, as is the East Central BOCES and the Colorado BOCES, the association. So I think we need to pay attention to what they're telling us in terms of what helps them to serve all children in our district. And there's a lot of information and research out there to indicate that targeted learning needs to happen with every child in our districts, not just one group of children or another. And by providing this funding...
Members, please show respect for the speakers in the well. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Excuse me, Ms. Representative Murray.
And so as a result, to see this high a fiscal note with additional CDE employees and additional district employees to handle an expanded program, I don't think the timing is right for this, and I respectfully ask for a no vote on this bill.
Representative Peniston.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Representative Murray. And I didn't know you taught gifted kids at one point. But interesting. The timing has to be now. Ever since I got down here 8 years ago, we have, as a gifted community in this state, backed off from asking for money. If you will look back at what we've passed for gifted kids over the years, it's always been tweaking this and tweaking that and saying to the districts, please serve these kids with the money you have available. You'll see that throughout state statute with the funding available. And we have never asked for any more money put into these kids. Now, I don't know how many of you are aware that this is the only exceptional student group that does not require a coordinator in every district or administrative unit. Districts did not go to the federal government or to the state government and say, please put in a full-time coordinator for special education kids. That happened at the federal level because we knew we had to serve those kids appropriately, and someone with the educational background, the certification to do it was necessary. That was put in. Districts didn't ask for that. ELL kids have to have, by law, a full-time coordinator. This is the only exceptional group of students that doesn't have to have a coordinator. And I get it that people think that gifted kids can fend for themselves and can make their education happen and with their parents. But let me tell you, folks, the stereotypic gifted kid, the little girl with the pigtails that walks into the classroom well-dressed, comes well-fed, has the eyeglasses on that she needs, and sits first, second row and pays attention the whole time and does her homework, does all her work, that may not be a gifted student. But that's our stereotype of what a gifted student is. Some of these students are the most at-risk kids that we have because their needs are not being met. Their needs as exceptional children, no one's paying attention to. And I shouldn't say it that, I don't mean to say it that way, that none of the districts out there now are paying attention, because they are. Many districts do a really good job of this. But many districts have not had the funding to do a good job of this. And that's what we're doing. We're giving them the funding to be able to do that. And the districts that already have the person in place, we're giving more money to serve these kids' needs better. Is it still enough? No, it will never be enough, but we are doing what we can for the first time in many years to fund these exceptional students.
Representative Wilson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Representative Peniston, for bringing this bill. I'm certainly one that wants to make sure that we fund our children. I have a few questions. Will this restore funding, or will this simply be designated for the expansion of the gifted and talented?
Representative Peniston.
Thank you, Representative Wilson, for the question. It is specific money to go to gifted programs. The universal assessment, the halftime coordinator. If the halftime coordinator already exists, then the money spills over into the gifted program of that administrative unit to use only for gifted education.
Representative Wilson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And that's what I thought that the bill said. So essentially then, as far as all of our categoricals, which are funded at 19%, will still be underfunded by 81% as we add a new program and fund a new program, when we won't address the fact that school districts are having to pick up the bill for 81% of all categoricals. Is that correct?
Representative Peniston.
Thank you, Representative Wilson. This is not a new program. This is nowhere near a new program. I read you the law. Districts have to do this now. We are giving them some resources to do that.
Representative Wilson.
Thank you, Representative Peniston. I was not implying that this is a new program. Trust me, I've been involved with those programs. Which brings up a question as to why 139 of our 178 school districts would be opposed to this, because most of us are already doing this. The other two questions I have are, what is the tool that's going to be used to assess? That was one of the questions. What tool will we be using to assess? And the other would be, how many currently are we not identifying? Do we know this underserved population?
Representative Peniston.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. What tools we're going to use will be up to the district and the district coordinator. We need to have someone that has the educational background to make those decisions, and there are a list. There's help from Colorado Department of Education through their gifted division, gifted office, I should say, and they are there to help with that. So it will be the appropriate assessments for the level of the age level for the students. So that's all done on the local level with help from CDE. Second question, remind me please, Representative Wilson.
How many are not identified?
Oh, how many are not identified? Thank you. Well, we don't know that. We have no clue. We know that there are, I've got lots of research here. We've got research from NAGC Gifted Programming Assessment. At-risk children possess diverse characteristics and behaviors that are associated with giftedness, might otherwise be overlooked in our traditional screening processes. The ramifications of inadequate early intervention for talent development are likely to be the most severe for students from poor and cultural minority backgrounds, and that's a study done in 2007, Primary Grade Teachers' Conceptions of Gifted and Talented, a case-based investigation done at the University of Connecticut. We don't know the answer to that, but we do know that that population has a lower percentage identification than different populations. But we know by the research, especially done at the University of Connecticut, that there are gifted kids in every population to a certain percentage. And right now, we're not finding, the way we're going about things, we're not finding those kids in the low income and minority populations. We need to do a better job, and that's what this bill is about.
Representative Wilson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So, colleagues, here's one of those simple 1, 2, 3 deals, okay? Do I agree with Representative Peniston's idea of money towards special funding and so forth for gifted and talented? Yes, I do. But consider these 3 questions. Number 1, there is no new tool. We still have the same assessment program that most school districts are utilizing right now. There's no help for categoricals, which our districts, your districts, are underfunded by 81%. That has nothing to do with the negative factor. They are required to fund those. And the third one, most important, have you checked with your district to see if they support this? Because 139 out of 178 districts do not. Please check.
Thank you, Joe.
Please check before you vote on this. Thank you.
Representative Moreno.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Members, I strongly support House Bill 1102, despite the fact that at one point in my life I was rejected from placement in a gifted and talented program. Members, don't feel bad for me. It just made me work harder the next year, and I got into that gifted and talented program. But members, in all seriousness, this bill, it was those gifted and talented programs in my school that provided me the opportunities to challenge myself. I went to schools that weren't the best at challenging kids, that instead of offering advanced placement classes or honors classes, offered more remedial classes instead, because they had to try to get kids through the system and try to get them to graduate. I wasn't challenged, but it's these gifted and talented programs that finally gave me the opportunity to feel like I was challenged in school and to make something better of myself. So I strongly support this bill.
Representative Holbert.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Members, I'm going to join with Representative Wilson and ask that you talk with your school districts. I think he mentioned 139 of the 178 districts are not in support. I think it takes us back to conversations that we've had earlier. Too late to tie this in and make it work. But as amended in the Appropriations Committee report, this bill allocates $3.4 million, which will come out of the state ed fund that could have been used to buy down the negative factor. That is what the districts have asked for. But now we're going to mandate that they take that $3.4 million and use it for this purpose rather than what they know to be right in their local districts. The Gifted and Talented program is not being debated here. It is a great program, and I encourage us all to support that. But the reality here is we have in House Bill 1102 as evidence of the benefit of being in the majority. This bill was held over until after school finance and student success. I mean, if you talk about it, an example of student success, Gifted and Talented is it. But here we have an allocation coming out of Appropriations Committee. We've heard the phrase pet projects. I don't want to disparage Gifted and Talented by categories that I know Representative Peniston cares about this program. I care about this program, but oh, the luxury of being in the majority and finding $3.4 million to fund something that you want to do when the districts don't, and this money could have been used to either buy down the negative factor or keep the state ed fund in a place where it is manageable and we can continue to have those funds and year after year buy down that negative factor. This is a bad idea on how to use that $3.4 million. It's not the right thing. We should have put this in to negative factor. It should have been part of student success or school finance, and I ask for a no vote.
Representative Peniston.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Well, thank you. This has been a good debate. I was up for it. I was excited for it. I appreciate all the points of view, but I will simply leave you with the thought that, colleagues, these are our brightest students, and we have asked our districts to limp along, serving and identifying these kids with no funding. That's what this bill does. I ask your yes vote. Thank you.
Did you want to speak? Yes, Minority Leader. Mr. Minority Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Members, it simply comes down to this. Do we want to expand a program before we fully fund our other obligations? That is what this question comes down to. So now, do we want to expand this program? It's a very laudable goal. I'm not saying that I wasn't gifted or talented, so I have to take a 21C or any of that stuff. But the reality is, do we want to expand a program before we go back and fully take care of our existing obligations? That is the question that we need to answer on voting yes or no on this bill, and I urge a no vote on that fact alone.
Representative Peniston.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Well, this is not an expanding of a program. This is programs that already exist, law that already exists, and we just need to fund it better. So I ask for your yes vote, and I am happy to have the last word.
Well, what if I don't want to?
Is there any further discussion on House Bill 1102? Seeing none, the question before us is the adoption of House Bill 1102. All those in favor say aye. Aye! All those opposed, no. No. House Bill 1102 is passed. Mr. Assistant Majority Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I move to proceed out of order for consideration of Senate Bill 158.
Seeing no objection, the committee will proceed out of order to consider Senate Bill 158. Madam Majority Leader. Please read the title. Mr. Kohler, please read the title.
Senate Bill 158 by Senator Stedman and Jones, also Representatives Hollinghurst, concerning the harmonization of statutory recall election provisions with the recall provisions in the state constitution, reflect the manner in which contemporary elections are conducted in connection with aligning circulator regulation and petition requirements with initiative and referendum circulator and petition requirements.
Madam Majority Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I move Senate Bill 158, and there is no committee report.
All right. To the bill. Madam Majority Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This bill deals with the recall election statute. Recall elections are governed by a 100-year-plus old constitutional provision that allows candidates up to 15 days before an election to petition onto the ballot only in a recall election. This petition timeline is not in place for any other type of election. And the current 15-day turnaround timeline makes it extremely difficult, if not impossible, to get mail ballots out and in some areas even conduct an election, creating many issues. It virtually eliminates the ability of easily for military and overseas voters to vote in recall elections. It creates ballot access issues for elderly working families and disabled voters who depend on mail ballots to participate in elections. And we heard testimony from those folks, a lot of them in the committee meeting. So this statute is intended to solve those problems and do so within the statutes. The most important provisions of Senate Bill 158 would harmonize the recall election law with existing constitutional language. There's some language in the statutes right now that's actually contrary to the Constitution. It would define the day the governor calls the election as the first day of voting rather than the last day of voting. And as you know, we have a number of days of voting in our elections, in our modern elections. This gives candidates the ability to petition onto the ballot 15 days before the first day that voting begins and provides the clerks a longer timeline to print and send ballots and to, in fact, conduct in-person voting. Additionally, Senate Bill 158 would make the recall law reflect existing petitioner requirements for initiatives that prevent fraud, forgery, and abuse of the petition gathering process, and it would clarify that petitioners have one cure period, not endless cure periods. That's the ability to collect more signatures after they're found insufficient.
Well.
So this bill is a very practical, common sense way to solve this problem, to let people exercise their important right to recall and their fundamental right to vote in Colorado. I ask for your support of Senate Bill 158. And, Mr. Chair, I would like to move L013, amendment to Senate Bill 158, and have it displayed.
The amendment is properly before us. Please proceed.
It isn't displayed.
Ask that it be displayed.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This amendment deals with some technical issues, some clarifying issues, and one fairly important element. The first two lines, we left out designated election official in one area of the bill, and we're putting that in. Lines 3 through 7, the amendment provides clarification that, in fact, in recall elections that are done with general elections, that the timelines for the general elections apply, and also that the number of voter service and polling centers comport with the statute relative to general elections. Then in line 8 through 20, this provides for the ability in federal elections to comply with the Uniform and Overseas Citizens Absentee Voting Act, a federal act, and allows for recall-related ballot questions to be sent separately, so we can do both. And with the extra time frame involved with the recall ability to send recall ballots, the military people will get those ballots and will be able to send them back and have them counted if they're back 8 days after the last day of voting. So it solves that problem as well. I ask for a yes vote on Amendment L013.
Yes, Representative Norberg, to the amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Madam Majority Leader, quick question with respect to your amendment. With respect to the Uwakava voters, would this only be in play for recall elections that overlap with general elections?
Madam Majority Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And the answer to that question, Representative Wright, is yes. Oh, I beg your pardon. No, Representative Norberg. The fact of the matter is that the only time the Uwakava applies is in a general election. That's the only federal election. All other recall elections, it would not apply, but that doesn't mean that there won't be every effort to get the mail ballots to them under the current the law according to the way it would be changed here. So,
Representative Norberg.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So, Madam Majority Leader, just to clarify, the Uwakava provisions, the protections that we have in place in law to send out ballots 45 days in advance for military personnel would only be pertinent when recall elections and general elections overlap. Now, when there's a recall election outside of general elections throughout the year, those same Uwakava protections would not apply. Is that accurate?
Madam Majority Leader.
Thank you, Representative Norberg. As a matter of fact, they would not apply. They only apply in federal elections. They only apply in federal elections now. So the time frame, however, for other mail ballots will be complied with the changes that are provided for in this statute. So there will be plenty of time to mail to them, but we want to be able to mail a separate ballot to meet all of the elements of the federal law.
Is there any further discussion on the amendment L013? Seeing none, the question before us is the adoption of amendment L013. All those in favor say aye. Aye. All those opposed say no. Amendment L013 passes. To the bill.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I ask for a yes vote on this bill. It's a really good bill for the state of Colorado.
Any further discussion? Whoop. Yes. Representative Rankin. I'm sorry.
The amendment passed.
Representative Rankin.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You know, having suffered through a summer of elections commission and thought a lot about issues, particularly our vulnerability to outside lawsuits and attacks, I'm quite concerned that this bill is going to open us up to a lot of expense on the part of the state. I mean, clearly, the bill either changes the Constitution or interprets the Constitution in a way that leaves us vulnerable to a lot of questions and thereby litigation. So with that in mind, I would like to move Amendment L010 and have it displayed. You have it up. So what this amendment does, we cannot...
Hold on, Mr. Representative Rankin. The amendment is properly before us. Okay. Yes, we'll take a brief recess. Representative Rankin, recognized for your amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So what the amendment does, now we have properly on the table, we cannot, you know, the amendment clearly questions the constitutionality of this bill. It clearly says that we are questioning whether or not this body can interpret the Constitution to change the election date to be an election period. So, but we cannot, as an amendment to the bill, we cannot do a concurrent resolution to change, to put it to the voters to change the Constitution. What we can do is ask the voters to agree with this action, and that's what this amendment does. What this amendment will do is prevent litigation. That's all we're really trying to accomplish here. We're trying to, A, be transparent, let the voters know what we've done, and B, we're trying to head off litigation, of which we are assured there will be ample examples, both by Secretary of State and the AG. Believe that this will lead cost on the part of the state to litigate the matter. So I ask for your vote on this. It, in my view, should be a friendly amendment because we're trying to clarify to the voters what we're doing. We're trying to prevent litigation. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Madam Majority Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I would like a discussion as to whether this fits under the title or not.
We'll be in recess. Committee will return to order. The chair rules that the amendment is within the title. Madam Majority Leader.
Are you done, Representative Rankin? Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I would argue that, in fact, this bill is not unconstitutional. It's very much in sync with the Constitution, and in fact does it in a very good way that can be implemented now without having to go through the on a constitutional amendment in the next general election, when we may have recall elections either before or after, which could very well disenfranchise a very large number of our voters if that happens. I think it's important to correct it now. So in accordance with the General Assembly's plenary power, Senate Bill 158 amends recall-related statutes to conform them to the Constitution in a way that recognizes how contemporary elections are conducted. And the intent is not to curtail or abrogate the people's fundamental right to recall, but to preserve that right while clarifying the recall process and providing for mail ballot elections. In other words, Senate Bill 158 presumes that it is possible for recall elections to coexist with modern election administration.
Please excuse me.
Furthermore, the General Assembly isn't simply making preemptive changes in advance of a hypothetical issue, but attempting to respond directly to issues that arose during the 2013 recalls in a way that preserves the mail ballot regime. And specifically for recalls, the General Assembly is permitted to enact legislation to facilitate the operation of Article 21 of the state constitution, found in Section 4. And I would reiterate the final 2 paragraphs of that section that say, in submission to the electors of any petition opposed under this article, all officers shall be guided by the general laws of the state, that's us, except as otherwise herein provided. And this article is self-executing. And it says, but legislation, that's us, may be enacted to facilitate its operations, but in no way limiting, restricting the provisions of this article or the powers herein reserved. And that is precisely what we're doing with this piece of legislation. And I would argue that because of its importance, because of the fundamental rights that we're dealing with here in terms of right to vote, that it's very important that we act now, and I believe very strongly we are acting in accordance and in harmony with the state constitution.
Representative Rankin.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and Madam Majority Leader. I would simply pose a question to you, Madam Majority Leader. In drafting the bill and going through it, have we consulted with the Secretary of State's office and the Attorney General's office in regards to the amount of risk that we're exposing the state to? I mean, I understand the intent, and I understand the interpretation that we can interpret the Constitution. However, you know, there are people who disagree with that assumption, and I believe by taking such an action, by interpreting the Constitution in such a way where we're literally changing the election date to an election period, that we are exposing ourselves to quite a bit of criticism from outside sources and potential litigation. I think that we should be very transparent in this action. It's an important action. It's a very important action to interpret the Constitution in the arena of election, as we found out in the last year. So I mean, I'm simply saying here that we, you know, it's not universally agreed to that we can take such an action as the legislature, and that will present problems. So, Matt, I would ask for your for an answer whether or not we've consulted with Secretary of State and Attorney General's office on the risk we're exposing ourselves to.
Madam Majority Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have had many conversations with the Attorney General's office. Others have had conversations with the Secretary of State's office. I would point out it's the Attorney General who talks about these kinds of issues as they relate to Constitution. I don't think the Secretary of State should be the final voice on that. I will also point out that in committee, the Attorney General did provide testimony. The Secretary of State did not, if I remember correctly. And the Attorney General's representative did point out that they are neutral on this bill. They are not opposed to this bill. They felt that there were some risks involved in doing it this way, but they didn't flat out say it was unconstitutional. And I believe that very strongly that it is. And I will also tell you that the reason I believe very strongly that it is that I have also consulted with several other constitutional attorneys who do a lot of work on election law, and they feel very firmly that, in fact, maybe this will be challenged, but it will be a very short challenge, and that we will be very much in accord with the Constitution, that this bill harmonizes, it does not contradict, it simply implements the constitutional provision.
Representative Murray to the amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Well, I have always been a proponent of mail ballots, much to the dismay of some of those on my side of the aisle. So I really do support the use of mail ballots. But I also support the Constitution of the state of Colorado. And we're talking about an inconvenience here. And I get that the county clerks need some administrative relief. I do get that. But you know, it's hit me like a brick wall that as a result of mail ballots, which I've been a proponent for, we have come up against the wall of the Constitution. So that's no little matter for us to manage. And there are certain ways that the Constitution can be changed, and it should not be through statute. We do not have the authority to do that. So to me, this amendment takes away the controversy and solves any potential problems we may have in court. I understand that it is very awkward for county clerks right now, but awkward is not what we should be worried about. We either follow the Constitution or we don't. And so for us to redefine what voting day is a very big decision. I support the ultimate goal. Not everybody on my side of the aisle does. I support the ultimate goal of looking again at, okay, so how do we look in this modern age at what voting day should be? But the authority for that change does not rest in statutory change. It only rests with the people. So I am 100% behind this amendment, and I urge a very thoughtful aye vote from both sides of the aisle on this if we believe in the authority of the Constitution of Colorado.
Representative Salazar.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I was sat in committee when this bill was heard, and a couple of things. Number one is that the legislature helps interpret the Constitution by statutory provisions. And very directly, the Colorado Supreme Court said that statutes governing the exercise of power to recall are to be liberally construed in favor of the ability to exercise it, and any limitations on the power must be strictly construed. What this bill does is it allows for a liberal interpretation as required by the Supreme Court. It allows for a liberal interpretation of elections during recall. This bill is completely constitutional. Our job as a legislature is to develop statutes under the Constitution, which we are doing here, and this bill is constitutional. I ask for an aye vote.
Representative Murray.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Well, yes, I would say that is a liberal interpretation. Whenever you change the word day to something beyond, a certain number of days to be considered voting days. It's all in how you read what that authority should be. And I don't think it is our authority to change our voting system in a way that changes what voting day is construed to be. I mean, through our actions here in the legislature, we have moved to this place. And I guess you could say shame on us for not foreseeing all of the unintended consequences of the way we have changed the conduct of elections. But we are not disenfranchising people by holding on to a definition of voting day that we've had since we became a state. So to say that somehow we need to make adjustments because we're disenfranchising people is saying, well, in the past we've disenfranchised people. That's not true. We've just made it more convenient for people to vote through mail ballot elections. And, the topic here is not convenience. The topic is holding to the Constitution of the state. And if we start chipping away at this particular issue, what's next in our Constitution?
Representative Foote.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I'm going to be asking for a no vote on this amendment. A couple of things I want to talk about, and this is related to what we heard in the State Affairs Committee. I was there and we heard testimony, and we were able to ask questions and listen to what folks were saying about the recall elections last fall. And there were a number of people that did in fact indicate through letters or otherwise that they felt like they were disenfranchised because of the conflict that we now have with mail ballots. In fact, one of the county clerks said the same thing, that it was his opinion that voters were disenfranchised despite his best efforts over the fall. But it happened, which is why this bill is so important, because as we all know, recall elections can occur anytime, particularly before the next general election, which is where this amendment would go to. And I don't think that we should be in a situation where voters can be disenfranchised again if there happens to be another recall election this spring or summer, or even before the general election in the fall. And so the bill is important. This amendment would require us to solve the issue if it's voted for by the voters in the fall. And we could be facing another potential disenfranchisement situation just like we did last fall. And then on top of that, I also do think, and I think the testimony supports, that the bill is a constitutional solution. Of course there's going to be debate about it. There's litigation during every election. You're never going to find one side or the other that's going to agree on everything about elections. So of course there'll be litigation about this and a lot of other things when it comes to elections. That's just the nature of the beast, unfortunately. But we had information, and I believe it to be accurate, that this is a constitutional solution. The bill, that is, not the constitutional amendment, is a constitutional solution. You know, in our Constitution we have about 10 pages worth of wording when it comes to elections. Title I is about 400 pages, and Title I fleshes out further what the Constitution means and what the General Assembly is going to enact in order to make sure the elections occur pursuant to the Constitution. We have lots of terms that we've further defined in Title I that were in the Constitution. Circulated, ballot, elector, governing body, purchase, and residence. All those are indicated in the Constitution, but further defined in the statute. And that's exactly what this does with Election Day. I'm talking about the recall bill now, 158. It does the same thing. And so, members, I hope you'll agree, just like the testimony and State Affairs indicated, that this is constitutional and that this is a better solution than waiting for the fall, because we, at the end of the day, want to make sure that voters have the right to vote.
Representative Murray.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I did hear that in committee that one person said it was constitutional and the other said it wasn't. So I think, you know, that's why we're having this discussion today. But I want to repeat about disenfranchisement by saying through this process that that currently is in statute, that people are disenfranchised. You are saying that in the past people were disenfranchised, and I'm sorry, that's not logical. Now, it might be inconvenient because people travel more now and there are other issues related to modern life where people have gotten accustomed to not necessarily going to a polling place for an election. I agree, that's inconvenience. That's why we've changed many of our laws. That does not mean that we are disenfranchising people, or it doesn't mean that we should ignore the Constitution and change statutorily something that we don't have the authority to change. I urge and I vote on this amendment.
Representative Pabon. Oh, excuse me. Representative Ryden, excuse me.
They look alike.
It's usually Representative Schaefer they confuse me with. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Members, you know, our election laws are very complicated and complex. And when I talk to my constituents, they say, we elected you to go down there and do the hard work for us as our representative. We want you to figure these things out for us and give us good law that works for everyone. We want everyone to be able to vote and no one to be kept from voting. It's really pretty simple. Once again, we're being asked to abdicate our responsibility and not do the work that we were sent here to do. Members, I urge a no vote on this amendment.
Representative Pabon.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, not too long ago, we talked about the history of Colorado and where we had unfortunate circumstances arising out of the Amache incidents in the camp. And one of the things that I said during that debate is if you don't know your history, you're bound to repeat it. You're condemned to repeat it. And as I was looking through the precedent that we have with respect to clarifying and defining provisions in the statute, it was interesting to me, one, to see the number of statutes we have interpreting nearly every provision of the Constitution, and even beyond that in the criminal procedural code. But most interesting to me was as recently as 2012, in a Republican-controlled House, we introduced legislation and passed it nearly unanimously, defining and redefining the terms contained in the recall statute. And I was looking at who the co-sponsors of that statute were, and Representative Murray, you probably remember that because you were a co-sponsor of that statute. And there are many others who voted for that because it's common sense to take provisions in the Constitution that may be ambiguous or may need further defining and define them. And as recently as 2012, we didn't have a problem doing that. Now listen to this, it gets even better. In 1992, under a Republican-controlled House and Senate, we passed a provision, a statute, defining terms in the recall statute. In 1993, it was done. In 1994, it was done. In 1995, it was done. Now, I was not in the legislature and is not politically in tune. I was in middle school and high school, but I don't remember the outrage coming from the members in the body saying, we demand a vote by the people if we're going to interpret, if we're going to introduce anything that helps us to define what's in the Constitution. Now, I could be wrong, and I want everyone to come down here and tell me that I missed that. But I was here in 2012. And you're right, Madam Majority. We don't need everyone to come down to tell me where the outrage was. Maybe one person. But I don't remember it, and I was here in 2012. And we passed that, and I'll look up the votes, and I'll tell you what that number was. Here's my guess. It was 65 votes in the House, 35 votes in the Senate, because it was simply us redefining and defining provisions of the recall provision in the Constitution. Again, this is directly on point. So the outrage, the indignation, the fact that now we need to send this to a vote of the people when just 2 years ago it was okay, to me reeks of hypocrisy, and I ask for a no vote on this amendment.
Representative Holbert.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This amendment allows us to hold to the swearing in, the oath that we have all gone through as members of this General Assembly to uphold the Constitution, and allow the people to weigh in as to whether they want to change the way the recall elections are handled in this state. I think to the Assistant Majority Leader's point or question, what has changed? Where's the outrage? Where was the outrage? Well, I think that it's not a measure so much of what's happening here in this chamber or across the way in the Senate, but what's happened out in the districts around the state. In 1995 or in 2012, we didn't have thousands of people out in at least 2 or 3 Senate districts around the state who were paying attention and absolutely involved in a recall election or recall elections. And frankly, I see the underlying bill as one that I'll vote no on, but similar to other legislation, I see great opportunity because there's nothing better for the folks on my side of the aisle than for the majority to stick their finger right in the eye of the people of Colorado and tell them they were wrong. And that's what this bill will do. It will tell the people, at least in those 3 Senate districts and other activists around the state, no, you were wrong. And it's going to swat them on the nose, and they're not going to like it. So I see political advantage coming from passing this bill but I see opportunity and leadership in the amendment that Representative Rankin has brought to us. We can avoid, this assembly, the majority can avoid angering the populace, angering the voters out there who don't feel disenfranchised. They feel like they achieved what they set out to do. 2 successful recalls and another resignation. And this bill will tell them they were wrong. The amendment gives them the opportunity to go to the polls and tell us what they believe to be right. I ask you to support this amendment, support the Constitution, support the oath you've taken to uphold it. Ask for an aye vote.
Mr. Minority Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And Representative Pabon, the difference between some of those other bills and this bill is those other bills were just changing a few definitions. This bill is fundamentally changing how we conduct an election. That is the total difference between what we voted on before in the past. Representative Wyden, I understand you don't like what I'm saying, but to scream out to the amendment, Representative Foote, you made reference to litigation. And of course this is going to bring litigation because we have litigations in all elections, but we're seeing more and more litigation now because we continue to change the rules on how we conduct elections. And so when we continue to change the rules, then we change rules and we don't know if they're constitutional. Of course that brings more litigation. Just because we don't like the outcome of the game doesn't mean that we want to come down here and change the rules. And if we're going to change the rules because we don't like the outcome, the least we can do is allow the people to vote on whether or not we should change the rules of the game. So I urge an aye vote on this amendment.
Representative Norberg.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And Representative Pabon, I was not here in 2012, so I can't address the last change to the state constitutional recall provisions, but you did mention that the legislature has the authority to define language that is ambiguous or undefined in the Constitution. So I'm hoping you can help me, with respect to this bill, help me understand how the term that is listed, the term that's in our state constitutional recall provision, date for holding the election, is ambiguous or undefined.
Representative Wyden.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And members, again, I want to reemphasize the reason that we're sent here by our electorate is to do this work. It's our responsibility to do the work that they send us here to do. And, it makes me ask, why don't we just take all the bills that are left on the docket, put them into a referendum and send them back to the people and let them do all the work that they sent us here to do? Please, members, a no vote on this amendment.
Representative Foote.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I continue to focus on the disenfranchisement and avoiding that because voting is such a fundamental right, and of course the Colorado Supreme Court has said it many times. And Representative Holbert said something about sticking a finger in somebody's eye. And it made me think that one of the things that would happen, or actually did happen this last fall, was that we stuck a finger in the eye of the troops that were deployed overseas. These are troops, heroes that are fighting for us to preserve our rights and our liberties in Afghanistan and elsewhere, and including our right to vote. And because of what happened last fall, they couldn't vote. They didn't have the mail-in ballots because nobody had them. Now, I've also heard that maybe disenfranchisement isn't really the case if it's just merely an inconvenience, but I would submit that it's much more than an inconvenience for somebody that's deployed in the field in Afghanistan to get over here to El Paso or Pueblo County or wherever the next recall may be to actually exercise their right to vote, something they're fighting for us to preserve. This is why this amendment is not a good idea, members, because again, if there's a recall this summer, then those folks that are deployed overseas are going to face the same situation. We want to make sure that we can fix it as quickly as we can so we can avoid the disenfranchisement.
Representative Stevens.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Representative Wyden. See, I actually think it might just be a good idea on the referendum piece. Then everybody would get to find out what we're spending up here, and sometimes I think the people of Colorado, and most of the times, can figure it out and do better in some ways than we can or that we have up here. Members, this is a fundamental right. This is, we're not just talking about different projects that we want to do. What we're talking about is our right to vote. And I actually think this is exactly why this amendment makes sense, is that if this is all of our fundamental right to vote, and we've done this with a number of other election bills, why don't we let the people decide? Why don't we let people vote to say, hey, here's how we want to do a recall election? You know, there's all kinds of little things in this bill that all say, geez, we didn't get our way. We didn't like how this all turned out. So, you know what? We want to choose. We want to do this. When in fact, people came forward, particularly over this summer, and said, we've had enough. And it was Democrats and Repubs. They both said it. So members, what this only does is confirm what the people of Colorado said over the summer is, you let us decide. Don't you tell us how it's going to be. You let us decide. Bravo, Representative Rankin. That's how it should be. That's how it should be done. And it's arrogance, I think, to think otherwise. The people of Colorado are very capable and have spoken very loudly when it comes to certain measures. They know what they want to do. They know what they don't want to do. Members, this is reasonable. This isn't unreasonable. This is very reasonable. So, members, I say vote yes on this. What do we have to fear? You know, only this summer when we left it in the people's hands, people took initiative, and then suddenly we go, oh, it didn't turn out like we wanted. It didn't go the way we thought it should go. Ooh, we better contain this thing. That's just wrong. That's wrong. This is a fundamental right of people to recall the elected officials that are not doing what the people think should happen. That's what this is about. We didn't get our way. Uh-oh, the people got free, and now we got to contain this whole thing. I say give it back. Give it back where it belongs to the people of Colorado. Thank you, Representative Rankin. It's exactly the right move in this hour.
Representative Rankin.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just, I'd like to raise a couple of points to my colleagues on this side of the aisle. Do we often follow precedent for what other states are doing in law? Are any of you familiar with any other state that defines election date as a season? If you know of any, I'd like to know. In my limited research, we would be the only state that interprets our election date as a season. And the second thing I'd like to ask you about, I mean, I wasn't here when we voted on recall elections in the past, so I realized that you might have been dealing with almost an abstract issue because we had never had one. But the political climate now is much different. Every election that we are conducting ends in litigation. The recall elections were subject to litigation. Don't we, as a body, look at what our constituents are talking about? Don't we interpret and don't we take things seriously based on the climate, the political issues that have surrounded us in the last year? That's not unusual. The political climate that we're in now dictates that we be transparent, that we avoid litigation. Those are our duties.
Representative Pabon.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The arguments I hear being espoused in the well are because this is politically challenging, because the political winds have changed, we must suddenly stop exercising our leadership and our legislative authority to make these clarifying changes that are absolutely necessary to, in response to Representative Stevens' comments, to enfranchise all the people of Colorado. That's what this bill does. It makes sure that our veterans, it makes sure that anyone who wants to participate in any election in the state of Colorado has the right to do so. That's the exact goal and intent of this bill. But to say that we must kowtow now to the political winds and shirk our responsibilities as elected officials to exercise our leadership and to do what may not be politically popular but is the right thing to do is wrong. And so regardless of whether or not this constitutional provision is being used, which it is now, or another constitutional provision is being used, is not the question. The question becomes, how do we ensure fairness and equality amongst any times any of our constitutional provisions are invoked? That's what this Senate bill does. That's what we're attempting to do. And to characterize this otherwise, to say that because a political climate has changed, we can't do that, shirks our responsibilities to the people of Colorado. People of Colorado, I hope you're listening. There are many of us who will continue to exercise and fight for you and exercise our leadership on this issue. Thank you.
Representative Holbert.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Well, earlier we heard a justification to support the underlying bill to do it for the military, and certainly that's a great motivation to make sure that those who are serving in the military have access to the ballot and are able to vote. I think that that's probably not a real good justification for the underlying bill. I think that this amendment is more easily justified looking to the members of the military. Let them speak. They're serving this country. They are defending the Constitution that we've sworn to uphold. And frankly, the underlying bill, not this amendment, the bill, in my opinion, has members of the majority, those who support the underlying bill, they're down here once again negotiating with the rights of citizens that are provided and identified in the Constitution. And our constituents do not send us down here to negotiate with their constitutional rights. They limit our authority and designate our authority to amend statute. So if we want to step on constitutional rights of the people of Colorado, vote for the underlying bill. I'm a no vote. If you want to avoid stepping on the rights of Colorado citizens, of voters in this state, you'll support this amendment. And I would ask those who are supporting the underlying bill, don't negotiate with the rights of your constituents, and certainly don't negotiate with the rights of mine, because I know the people in House District 44 didn't send me down here to negotiate with their rights under the Constitution. I ask for an aye vote under this amendment.
Representative Waller.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Members, let me say this, and I know it's been out there quite a bit lately. We don't get to pick and choose the constitutional provisions that we are going to enforce in the state of Colorado. Let me say that again. We don't get to pick and choose the provisions that we enforce. We have to, it is the obligation to enforce every single constitutional provision that's there, even the ones we don't like. And in the legislature, as many of you know, and all should, statute does not trump the Constitution. We have a provision in place in the Constitution in the state of Colorado that clearly defines the timeline in regards to this piece of legislation. This legislation circumvents that timeline and creates another definition that goes beyond what's in the Constitution. This amendment is just simply trying to say, hey, let's put it to a vote of the people of the state of Colorado so we can have some constitutional clarification. You know, we do that. We have that process in the state to allow citizens to make a decision whether or not they want to amend or change or alter the Constitution in the state of Colorado. We cannot do that statutorily. We don't have the option as a legislative body to pass statute that amends the Constitution in the state of Colorado, and that's very much what this piece of legislation is doing. And so we need to have this amendment to be able to move forward, to have some sort of semblance of constitutionality for this piece of legislation moving forward. We need to have the option to send this back to the people to make a decision as to whether or not they want to alter or amend the Constitution in the state of Colorado.
Is there any further discussion on this amendment? Representative Pabon.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And members, we have all undertaken a sworn oath to do many things as part of our role as a legislator. We've taken a sworn oath to uphold the Constitution. And as part of that oath, our citizens demand that we make sure that every provision in our Constitution is clear, unambiguous, and implementable. And we've seen in their wisdom people of Colorado using our constitutional provisions. They use them all the time. The right to free speech. Our Colorado Constitution is invoked often. The right to be free from religious prosecution. The people of Colorado invoke that provision often. And as the legislature, we have been very diligent in making sure that when our citizens invoke these constitutional provisions, that the protections that are afforded to them as the people of Colorado are easily implementable, are easily executed, because they are asking us to use our sworn oath to help them. This isn't about political wins or political climate or changes in the electorate. This is simply about upholding our duty as members of the Colorado legislature to allow our citizens to be afforded the protections that are provided in the Constitution. And one of the biggest responsibilities that we have, and one of the reasons that we spend so much time in our campaigns and elections, is that they want us to do our job, and they elect us to do so. This amendment is a slap in the face to the people of Colorado. Shirks our responsibilities as a legislature. I ask for a no vote.
Representative Waller.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And Representative Pabon, I agreed with a lot of what you had to say. We took an oath to uphold the Constitution in the state of Colorado, and that's, I believe, our primary responsibility is to uphold the Constitution of the state of Colorado in this body, and we have an obligation moving forward not to pass legislation that is contrary to the Constitution of the state of Colorado. And Representative Pabon, you came down here and said, you know what? This clarifies, or we have an obligation to, when the Constitution is ambiguous, to pass clarifying language. I too would agree with you on that point as well, that we can pass legislation that clarifies the Constitution. Here's what we cannot do, members, and here's what we cannot do, Representative Pabon. We cannot pass legislation that changes the Constitution. We can pass legislation that clarifies, but we cannot pass legislation that changes the Constitution in the state of Colorado. In that case, the statute or the statutory language would then be unconstitutional. The issue here is, does this piece of legislation change the Constitution? Thank you for nodding your head in agreement with me there, Representative Wright. No, I'm kidding. But the issue becomes, does this change the Constitution in the state of Colorado? Or does it simply clarify the Constitution for the people of the state of Colorado? And the problem here is this actually, no kidding, makes a change. It makes a change to what the Constitution in the state of Colorado currently says. It doesn't clarify it, it changes it. And because it changes it, that makes it unconstitutional. And we have an obligation, that's right, Representative Pabon, we have an obligation to our citizens. And we have an obligation to our citizens to pass legislation that is in complement to the Constitution of the state of Colorado, we have an obligation to the citizens to pass legislation that is not contrary to the Constitution of the state of Colorado. And by passing this legislation, and certainly passing this legislation without this amendment, we are failing in that obligation to our constituents and to the citizens of the state of Colorado.
Representative Wyden? No. Mr. Minority Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. After Representative Waller successfully argued Representative Pabone's constitutionality comments, I'll address the last comment about how this amendment somehow is a slap in the face of the people of Colorado. Well, heck, this whole bill is a slap in the face of the people of Colorado. Because we don't like what happened with the recalls, we want to say, people of Colorado, we don't like the decisions that you made, so we're going to fundamentally change those so you cannot do it again. How is that not a slap in the face of the people of Colorado? So by saying that we're going to allow you to vote on whether or not we're going to fundamentally change how we run elections, I don't see how that would be a slap in the face of those people of Colorado. So there again, if we're going to fundamentally change how we conduct these elections, we need to at least give the people of Colorado the dignity of allowing them to vote on whether or not we want to change those election rules. And I urge an aye vote on this amendment.
Representative Dorr.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This amendment, I think, what the least as it does, it says, people, we are going to respect you and the authority that the Constitution has given to the people with regard to changing that particular document. And what concerns me about this legislation in general, and it's helped by the amendment, is that we are redefining time. We're redefining the idea of what 24 hours means, that it will no longer be 24 hours. A day does not mean 24 hours anymore. It means a period of time as so designated by whoever decides that those are the times to do it. And that's far beyond just a little tweak of any kind of law, statute, or constitution for that matter. That is a major, major deviation from where we are at today, and the people should have an opportunity to say, yes, we want our state to go in this direction. I ask for a yes vote.
Madam Majority Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Well, I would say to this amendment, it might be an interesting idea to take this to the people, but I firmly believe that they don't want us to do that, and that's the testimony that we heard in committee. What the people of the state of Colorado want us to do is allow them to vote to protect their fundamental right to vote in all elections. And we are doing this by redefining and clarifying a particular element in the Constitution that has been done before by this body, has not had this huge argument, I don't believe, has had very strong support. And just because now we finally have 2 elections that have occurred and have pointed out some really serious issues that we need to correct, there seems to be, and because they won, I guess, and they think we lost, which I quite frankly don't believe actually happened in the recall elections, it didn't pertain to me at all, that somehow we are doing this and slapping the faces of the people of the state of Colorado. Well, I oppose this amendment for the very opposite reason, to protect the fundamental right of people in Colorado to vote on every election. And I believe very strongly that the change that is made here is well within the Constitution. I think it will be proved to be correct. So I ask for a no vote on this amendment that delays action that is very important for the people of the state of Colorado.
Mr. Minority Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Members, the people of Colorado elect us to come down here and protect their right to vote, not change it. Now, we just heard for about an hour about how this bill is just clarification, and then the majority leader just spoke now about there's some serious changes that we need to make. So is it A, clarification, or is it serious changes? So if it's truly clarification, well, then maybe we can do that. But if there's serious changes, then we need to take it to the vote of the people, because that means we're fundamentally changing how we conduct these elections. So we're getting mixed messages from the same people that are running this bill. One group of people said, oh, this is just clarification. All we're doing is just fixing some definitions. But then I just heard 30 seconds ago that there are some serious changes that we need to address with our elections. So to me, serious changes does not mean definitions. That is why if we're going to make serious changes and we're going to fundamentally change how we conduct these elections, we need to at least allow the people to have a say in that. I urge an aye vote.
Madam Majority Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And assuming that this is the last word on this amendment, which the sponsor, I believe, has the right to talk to, I'm asking for a no vote. This amendment delays doing what we need to do for the state of Colorado and presumes that what we're doing is unconstitutional. I take offense at that. I would never do that if I believed that were the case. We are well within the Constitution. I ask for a no vote.
Representative Waller, for the last word.
Maybe this is only the second to the last word, Mr. Chair. Maybe it's only the third to the last word. Maybe I'll come up and speak 3 or 4 more times, Mr. Chair.
To the amendment, Mr. Waller.
No, I appreciate that, Mr. Chair. I was just saying that, you know, perhaps we can continue the debate on this piece of legislation. I thought that's what we were here to do. So thank you, Mr. Chair, for giving me the opportunity to speak to this amendment. I appreciate that very much, and I'm hopeful that this is my last time speaking to this amendment, but I'm here to say, just to forewarn you, Mr. Chair, that maybe it is not. Maybe perhaps I am going to be here. But here's what I would say. You know, Madam Majority Leader, I appreciate your desire to comport with the Constitution of the state of Colorado. I appreciate your desire to pass statutory language that complies with the Constitution of the state of Colorado. That doesn't mean that's going to happen. And so the reason that we debate legislation here is to put all sides out there so we can come up with the absolute best possible solution moving forward. So I apologize, Madam Majority Leader, if there's a concern that we are, for some reason, calling into question your motives for passing this piece of legislation. I can promise you that's not the case. And I apologize if we're, in some way, it hurts your feelings that we're calling into question the constitutionality of this piece of legislation. And I truly don't want to in any way question why you're moving this piece of legislation forward. But I think it is perfectly right and just and appropriate and valid to have a discussion about the constitutionality of this piece of legislation. And maybe you could just solve it for me once and for all. Come and explain to us, tell us how this piece of legislation only merely clarifies the Constitution instead of how this piece of legislation, no kidding, changes the Constitution. We've heard numerous people come down here and make an argument about how they feel and believe that this piece of legislation changes the Constitution. Tell us how this is no more than a clarification.
Madam Majority Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And quite frankly, I would go through my explanation of why I believe that this clarifies the Constitution. But, you know, we have repeated ourselves quite a bit here on both sides of the aisle. I think there have been very, very good explanations about why this is a clarification, why it's been done before, why it is important to do it now. I ask for a no vote on this amendment.
Is there any further discussion on the amendment? Seeing none, the question before us is the adoption of Amendment L00010. All those in favor, say aye. Aye. Those opposed? No! The amendment is lost. To the bill. Representative Dorr.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Members, this legislation and the last amendment dealt with a lot of the troubles that are in there. The biggest issue that I have, and I think the issue that everybody to a level in this chamber has, at least the question around it in the heart of this legislation, is how are we redefining, or are we going to allow date to be redefined to dates? Are we going to allow a set period of time in the Constitution to be opened up to an undefined amount of time, only defined by when somebody says stop, start, and stop? And that's troubling, and it goes beyond what I think we ever should do down here, which is redefining the Constitution in a way that dramatically changes the intent of what was written in there. And if we want to do that, there's protocol for that, and that is going to the people for an amendment modification to the Constitution. So I ask to move L016 and ask that be properly displayed. Members, this amendment is simple. Page 4 of the bill, line 7. We good?
The amendment is properly before us.
Sorry, Mr. Chair. Thank you. Page 4, line 7, striking through line 9, and we substitute the word state constitution. We're going to say, yes, we believe the state constitution still exists. We should still follow it. It is the law of the land and should be treated as such. I ask for a yes vote.
Yes, Representative Ryden.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Members, I urge a no vote on this amendment.
Minority Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I guess I'm perplexed by asking for a no vote on inserting the Constitution into a bill. I guess I'm totally confused by that. Why we would say I urge a no vote on referencing the Constitution in a bill. I would urge an aye vote. I believe that we all swore an oath to uphold the Constitution on our first day. Maybe you guys weren't here. I was, and we all took an oath to uphold the Constitution. So to think that we're going to ask for a no vote on inserting the constitutionality into a bill is beyond me. So I urge an aye vote on the Constitution.
Representative Labuda.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. As for the minority leader's argument, what those two lines do is they say strike 7 through 9 and substitute state constitution. They're striking state constitution, which is already in the bill. It's in the bill already. You struck it and then you're reintroducing it. So that's no argument.
Representative Melton. Excuse me. Madam Majority Leader.
Are you ready to withdraw?
She actually now just told me.
It's okay.
Yeah. No further discussion. Madam Majority Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I ask for a no vote. What this does basically is it takes out the issue of the date for holding the election, and that's one of the things that we're doing that's very important in this bill, and we're doing it constitutionally. There is nothing in this constitutional provision that talks about election day. It always refers to the date for holding the election. We have clarified that, and I believe we've clarified it correctly. That is the portion of this amendment that I ask for a no vote. Please.
Representative Dorr.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And Madam Majority Leader, I respect your argument, but the issue for me is this is more than clarification. This is redefining date to make it dates, a period of time. And that is troubling because that goes outside of what the Constitution says. The Constitution specifically says the date of the election, not the dates of the election. It's a singular and plural issue. And while I don't want to get into an English language debate down here, I think there's some pretty clear definition with regards to what singular and plural means. And when you go to more than one date, you're using dates, and it is a redefinition of it. And I think that's troubling. And this amendment really says we're going to respect the Constitution, we're going to make sure that we continue to abide by it, and then it doesn't become something a little more than toilet paper down the road.
Is there any further discussion on Amendment L016? Seeing none, the question before us is the adoption of Amendment L016. All those in favor say aye. Aye. All those opposed say no. No! The amendment is lost. Any further discussion on the bill? Seeing none. Excuse me. Representative Sane.
Thank you, sir. I would like to move Amendment L018 and ask that it be properly displayed. I moved it. I will move it. I move L018. Thank you, ma'am.
The amendment is properly before us.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Folks, our military members deserve to have the same consideration that they do in the general election. They deserve to have that consideration because when we are removing a person of this General Assembly, their representative or senator, that they get the same consideration because right now they have 45 days before the election. Now they have 37 in this bill. So I asked for a yes vote on this amendment because what this will do is it will give an equal amount of time on the back end to allow their votes to be counted. We need to give our military members who fought for us the same consideration in this type of election as they currently now enjoy. Thank you.
Any further discussion on the amendment? Madam Majority Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And this amendment would be very, very difficult to implement, if not impossible. And therefore, I believe that it should not be passed. We have a way now under this bill to send ballots to the military and to do it in a time frame where they can get them back without having to meet the federal requirements of the law that are a little bit different. But now, with this bill, we can do that constitutionally with the time frame that is allowed in the bill, except for a general election where this is definitely required. Now, I will tell you in other elections, it's not as well, that are non-federal elections. They do it, but they don't necessarily do it according to all of the provisions of the federal act. So, but in a general election, that has to happen. So this is what we have done in the bill is we have made it work for all other elections other than general elections, and we've done that according to the provisions of the Constitution, and we have then, in case of a general election, provided that that there be a separate ballot for recall, so that we can do all of the other things. I don't think the result of what we do here, we want actually to have the military people not to be able to get any of the other general election ballots. And I'm afraid that that's exactly what this amendment would lead to. I ask for a no vote.
Representative Singh.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I appreciate the concerns that were brought forward. But I do take some issue with the fact that it may be too hard. Nothing's too hard for our military members. Nothing's too hard for the people who've put their lives on the line for us to defend our freedoms and defend our country. So we need to find a way to make this happen because they do deserve this process to be the same, especially when it comes down to something so important as the election of their state official, their representative or their senator. So I ask for a yes vote.
Seeing no further discussion, the question before us is the adoption of Amendment L018. All those in favor say aye. Aye. All those opposed say no. No! Amendment L018 is lost. To the bill. Representative Nornberg.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And members, along the lines of helping our men and women serving overseas be able to vote, make sure all their votes count, I would like to introduce Amendment L015 and ask that it be displayed.
Tell them to move it, not introduce it.
I would move L015 and ask
Please move L015.
Just did. Thank you. Members, what this would...
The amendment is properly before us. Please proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Members, what this would do would allow every UOCAVA voter, every men and women serving overseas in the U.S. Armed Forces, to submit their ballot electronically for a recall election. Now, right now as it stands, with this bill, this is allowing for a 37-day process for ballots to be sent out as far away as Afghanistan, Iraq. That does not conform with our UOCAVA provisions that are currently in statute, which is 45 days. That being the case, I think we need to allow every accommodation possible to ensure that men and women of our armed forces votes count, and I would ask for a yes vote.
Representative Humphrey.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Members, as a veteran who served overseas, I just want to support this amendment. This is so important to make sure these folks have access. It's difficult when they're out there and they can be out on a mission and have trouble being able to have a sufficient amount of time to cast their ballot. And I urge your aye vote on this amendment.
Seeing no further discussion, is there further discussion on this amendment? Yes, Representative Melton.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Representative Norberg, I'm sorry, I have a question because I know that the military can already vote via electronic email services and we make those provisions. Where exactly does it say that they can't do that for a recall election?
Representative Norberg.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Representative Melton, that's an excellent question. Actually, the only way, what this is doing is for the recall provisions. Now, for general elections, they can do that. They can use electronic means to submit their ballot. This is applying it to the recall process. So it would take care of that for recall elections.
Any further discussion regarding Amendment L015? Madam Majority Leader.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. I believe that this amendment is unnecessary, and I ask for a no vote.
Any further discussion? Hearing none. The question before us is the adoption of Amendment L015. All those in favor say aye. Aye. All those opposed say no. No. The amendment is lost. To the bill. Representative Dorr.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Members, we heard in committee some of the issues potentially from some of the localities when it comes to, if this legislation were to become law, implementing the elections as they oversee a process with some potential conflicts, not only within the law, but in being able to do it in the time frames. And so in addressing some of those issues that local clerk and recorders had or possibly foresee as being concerns moving forward, I move L017 and ask that it be properly displayed.
The amendment is properly before us. Please proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This amendment, members, simply says to the local officials who oversee and implement elections that if there is situations where it is impossible to assure that what is in the legislation happens, that they would be allowed to be permitted to not have to implement some of it's reasonably determined that the impossibility exists. Now, one of those could be a court order, which is in the amendment. The court order by itself probably precludes the impossibility, saying you just can't do this. But it also allows the localities, giving back some local control to our elected officials back home at the districts, saying, yes, if there's an issue that comes up, and you can't do it impossibly, and it's reasonable that you made that decision, then we're going to let you make those decisions. Because we as the legislative body cannot possibly think of all the different scenarios that are going to happen throughout the different election districts throughout our state. So this is giving some control and authority to them to make the decisions when necessary to make sure that elections continue to run smoothly and fairly as possible. I ask for a yes vote.
Representative Melton.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Members, we heard this amendment in the State Affairs Committee when it was on its hearing, and it was voted down because it's too vague. It allows for too much wiggle room for the clerks, and really there was no explanation as to how this could be tightened down, how we can make sure that these exemptions wouldn't be abused. So because of that, I asked for a no vote on Amendment L017.
Representative Dorr.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The vagueness issue really is, I don't think, founded in a way that we as the legislative body can determine that. Because so many different issues, we cannot possibly think of every scenario that could come up where a clerk at a particular county, let's say Mineral County, one of the smallest counties in our state, or Kiowa County, or even in situations closer to the metro area, where you may have an issue come up in Douglas County. They can't possibly implement something. I don't know every scenario, and so the vagueness is necessary in order for them to have the flexibility. They're not going to go out and break the law just to break the law. What we're going to say is don't break the law. But when the situation is impossible, because you have determined, clerk, that that is the case, we're going to let you have the flexibility to make sure that an election can run smoothly. I mean, too much of the arguments around here act as if this legislation is trivial. This is a major change in our election process, and we got to be able to let some flexibility happen at the ground level when where the elections occur, so we can make the fairness and smoothness of elections continue to happen in Colorado. I ask for a yes vote.
Madam Majority Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I move to lay over Senate Bill 158 until later today.
Any objection? Seeing none, the matter is laid over
As
until
amended,
later.
please.
Excuse me. The matter is laid over until later today.
But hold on one second. Yeah. We're in the middle of this. Then we're going to rise and, that's what she just told me to do. Yeah, but she just laid it over in the middle of it. It's recess.
Recess? We're in recess. Committee will come back to order.
Do you want to deal with this quickly? Because we got to get out of here.
That's fine. I mean, so we'll finish the amendment and then.
Yeah, okay. All right. I withdraw my motion, Mr. Chair.
Very well. Mr. Representative Dorr, to the amendment.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I once again ask for a yes vote on this. I think it's imperative that we allow the local election officials to have the authority to make decisions. And if sometimes that decision means that they cannot implement something because of what's going on in that particular election area, election district, that they have some level of flexibility, we need to give them that when we do major changes to, this is a major change to the Constitution, and they deserve at least to have some level of flexibility in addressing that. I ask for a yes vote.
Representative Melton? Madam Majority Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I ask for a no vote on this amendment. The local elected officials have strongly supported this bill. I don't believe that what we're doing here is giving them flexibility. I ask for a no vote.
Is there any further discussion on the amendment 017? Seeing none, the question before us is the adoption of amendment 017. All those in favor say aye. All those opposed, say nay. No! The amendment is lost. To the bill, Madam Majority Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I move to lay over Senate Bill 158 until later today as amended. Thank you.
Seeing no objection, the matter is laid over until later today on the calendar. Madam Majority Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I move that the committee rise and report progress and sit again later today.
Seeing no objection, the committee will rise and report progress and sit later on today.
The House will come back to order. Mr. Kohler, please read the report of the Committee of the Whole.
Mr. Speaker, your Committee of the Whole reports as follows. It has risen, reports progress, and begs leave to sit again later in the day.
That sounds great. Announcements and introductions. Do we have any? Representative Singer.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. House Local Government will be meeting today at 1:30, and I will see you down in the basement.
Representative Sonnenberg.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And members, you may have seen a Western Day at the Capitol on your desk yesterday afternoon. The Senate has relaxed their dress code. I did not ask for that in the House because, quite frankly, I don't believe in that. If you happen to wear boots, that's fantastic. If you happen to have a big belt buckle, the buckle bunnies will come a-running. Some of you cowboys understand that, but anyhow, I wanted to let you know that we are going to have a great day tomorrow, but please be dressed appropriately. Do not wear the jeans as if you may have seen this as yesterday. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Representative Sonnenberg. Representative Labuda.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Members, after our discussion about the budget yesterday, I went home and thought about it. I have served in this House for 8 years now, and for about 6 of those years, I have not liked what is in the budget because of budget cuts and made me cry about them. But I voted for all the budgets because I think the main thing that we do in this House is to make sure that we have a balanced budget. Thank you.
Labuda, we're on announcements and introductions. Do you want to take a moment of personal privilege or?
Personal privilege.
Okay, Representative Labuda will be granted a moment of personal
All
privilege.
right, I'll start over. Just repeat what I said. Forgot to ask about that. I apologize. When I went home last night and thought about the discussion we were having about the budget, as I said, I've been here for 8 years. 6 of those years, I have not liked our budget because of the budget cuts we've had to make. And there were things in the budget that were cut that I didn't like. I didn't want them. But I have voted for every single budget because I think one of the main reasons we're here is to vote on a balanced budget as required by the Constitution. So I've done that. And I heard people yesterday saying they wouldn't vote for it for other reasons. I'm just explaining to you why sometimes I didn't like the budget. I voted for it. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you. Representative Rydin.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Members of the State Veterans and Military Affairs Committee will be meeting in about 15 minutes over in LSB, and we will be taking up House Bill 1365.
Representative Tyler.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Members of the House Transportation and Energy Committee, we will not be meeting today, which will give you the opportunity to visit another committee and understand what a darn good job we do in transportation and energy.
Representative McCann.
Thank you, Mr. Speakers. Just a reminder that we have the Claw Caucus tomorrow at noon in room 112, and I expect to see you there. It'll be an interesting discussion of the potential ballot initiative on no kill. We're going to present both sides of view. So that's in room 112 at noon tomorrow.
Representative Fisher.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Members of the House Agriculture, Livestock, and Natural Resources Committee, I would appreciate if we could start committee down in 107 in 10 minutes. That'd be about 10 minutes to noon. So please be down there promptly. We're taking action only on House Bill 1332.
Representative Court.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Okay, we're coming back after afternoon committees, but we are not feeding you tonight, okay? We're feeding you tomorrow night. I'm not feeding nobody. So, even if we're here till 6, you're still responsible for your own dinners tonight. Tomorrow night, we will feed you. Thank you.
Representative Conti.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Members, that's a ditto for the Republican caucus, so do plan on bringing, if you feel like you will be hungry before 6 o'clock, please make those arrangements and come prepared when you come.
Representative Court. We'll say when we're coming back.
Thank you. I was just going to say, so this is impetus to make the afternoon go quickly so you can go home and have your dinner.
There you go.
Members, we are breaking. Morning committees will be easily done by 1:30. Afternoon committees will meet from 1:30 to, the goal is 3, and be back on the floor by 3 o'clock. And we will spend several hours on the floor tonight, continuing the second reading calendar we have on there. So seeing no other announcements or introductions, the House will stand in a pleasant recess till later today.